Two groups totaling 48 travelers arrived in the port town of Kusadasi. We were off on a voyage of the Aegean to 7 different Greek islands. We boarded our small ship named for the Greek goddess Artemis. Then we sailed away from Turkey.
This evening, at 8 p.m., we will sail out from Kusadasi to Patmos. Sailing will take 4 hours, so we expect to arrive Patmos just after midnight. We are sailing in the Aegean Sea, and this is not a river boat. This is a small seagoing ship. So we are very much dependent on the weather conditions. So sometimes we have good weather, it turns to a blue voyage. But sometimes we need to deal with Mr. Poseidon, the god of the seas. So in that case, we may have some motion on board. Anyway, what I'm going to do, I will keep checking the weather forecast, and if anything is up, you will be the first ones who knows about the weather.
We awoke in the port village of Skala on our first stop, the sacred island of Patmos. We headed down to the coffee room and the breakfast buffet. We went off on an excursion to the UNESCO World Heritage Village of Chora to visit 2 monasteries built in the honor of John, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. In the year 95, John was banished to the island of Patmos by a Roman emperor. In 1088, the island was given to a soldier priest who completed the monastery in just 3 years. It was given to him by Alexis Comnenus, emperor during the Second Crusade. Its heavily fortified exterior became necessary because of the threats of marauding pirates and crusaders. The monastery has 3 flour mills. 2 were built in 1588 and the other in 1863. They were abandoned in the 1950s. They won an award for their restoration in 2012. A service was just ending and the bells of the monastery rang across the valley. This Greek Orthodox monastery has been a place of uninterrupted pilgrimage for almost 1,000 years. Hidden in the walls are fragments of an ancient temple of Artemis, which was destroyed when the monastery was built. Many of the frescoes date from the 1100s. Simply visiting this awe-inspiring site allowed us to see part of Greece that combines history, architecture, and religion in one single cultural experience. Originally this, then very remote, island was used for banishment, a common punishment used by the Roman imperial period. Banishment could be for many different offenses, including prophecy, whether polytheist, Jewish, or Christian. Prophecy, with its political implications, like those expressed by John in the book of Revelation, would have been perceived as a threat to the Roman political power and order. We came out onto a shopping street just below the monastery. You could buy your own assembly of monks and their humble parishioners to take home if you so desired. There's a cobbled path that leads to the Monastery of the Apocalypse, also built in 1088. It holds the Cave of the Revelation. Tradition says this is the place where the illiterate John dictated the last book of the Christian Bible to his pupil Prochorus. This volcanic cavern is the place where John lived and worked. He is said to have received his divine revelations of fire and brimstone here. The cracks in the walls of the cave are believed to have appeared when the appostle heard the voice of God. Some of the group decided to return to the ship via the old pilgrimage path. On the way, we passed wildflowers, including the yellow-flowered medicinal herb St. John's wort, native to this area. The name comes from its traditional harvesting on St. John's Day, June 24th. As we descended the path toward the water, we came across a dove sitting on a rock. Believers might suspect that it was John, greeting us as we passed. We returned to the port village of Scala. Most of the island's 2,500 people live in Scala or up in the medieval Chora. This is the commercial center and the location of most of the hotels and restaurants. Strict building codes have been enforced, and even new buildings have traditional architectural detail. We boarded Artemis in time for our buffet luncheon. An afternoon thunderstorm cleared away to provide a spectacular sunset on Scala and the island of Patmos.
We woke early to watch sunrise over the Aegean. As we dressed, we sailed past Greek islands in the sparkling water. We headed down to our now beloved coffee station and to breakfast. As we pulled into the dock at the scenic island of Amorgos, I could hear the sound of goats on the hillside above the port. There was a man picking up some milk cans. Above him were a herd of goats and a small building we took as the milking shed. A Greek flag flew above them in the soft morning breeze as our captain skillfully guided us to the dock, bathed in the morning sunlight. Amorgos, an elongated island that winds like a sea serpent through the Aegean, has been inhabited since prehistoric times. Due to its position across from Ephesus, it became one of the first places to pass going between Turkey and mainland Greece. Today, Amorgos is visited by people who come to the island to enjoy the rough beauty of the landscape. The pride of the island is the Greek Orthodox Monastery of the Grace of Panagea, or Virgin Mary. Perched away from danger, hundreds of feet above the water, the monastery is austere and simple. It conforms to the steep hillside and is visible only from the sea or a winding path of about 380 steps up to the airy, spectacular white edifice. Sandy and Mark from Ohio follow behind us on our morning trek. At the top of the long, steep, winding steps is a room where we were greeted with candy and a cool beverage. One of the only 3 monks who reside there welcomed us. This monastery, like the monastery on Patmos, was founded by Emperor Alexis Comnenus I in 1088. Many monks have resided here for almost 1,000 years. Out on a small balcony, we looked up at the yellow flag of the Greek Orthodox Church flying above, and below on the crooked path we had ascended. Then back down, twisting and turning to fit through the small stairs, providing a personal and clear meaning of the term cloister. The women were required to wear skirts, so Kathy and I were dutiful in our monastery visiting attire. Kathy's father, Carlton, and Van posed against the spectacularly blue water. We drove to the village of Chora and saw the top of the hill lined with its iconic ancient windmills. We had found our goal for the afternoon. Through the medieval lanes, we wandered past numerous churches in the almost deserted, pedestrian-only village. We glimpsed the mills in the distance and kept wandering in what we hope was the general direction of our inspiration. Cats seemed to be the major population, at least on this day. We passed by a magnificent, pure white church which glowed against the blue sky. Just beyond was a taverna that was actually open. On the veranda sat our shipmates Dina and Jim from Pennsylvania having a quiet drink. We were tempted to join them, but carried on toward our goal of the mills on the hill. Then, suddenly a sign appeared. Hooray, we'd made it! We explored the mills inside and out. We aren't sure what they processed here. Then, on the hillside, Kathy appeared. She and Carlton, fellow Californians, had also found the mills. We agreed to walk back together, but wanted to get what Van and I call our flawless shot. Got it. Flawless. Our time was now running short. Must meet the bus. We did learn that the island had been famous for Amorgina, a fine, transparent fabric made from locally grown flax. The island's present name of Amorgos derives from this cloth and the Amorgos plant from which a rare red dye was extracted to color royal tunics. Both the cloth and the dye industries are now in the long and distant past.
Postcards, small shops that sell the local products right here on the left side is narrow alley, okay, which is close to the boat, to the ship, Artemis. So let us thank Mr. Yannis. Please make sure that you take all your things from the bus. Thank our driver and enjoy your free time here until 1 o'clock, okay?
little parade.
No, it's a herd.
This.
That's cute.
We had time in the afternoon to organize our things and take a break in the ship's lounge.
The weather was very breezy that afternoon. We had to anchor off the island of Naxos until the wind died down and we could tie up. We gazed at the gate of Apollo's temple, a 2,500-year-old marble gateway. We finally moored, and that evening were able to take a short walk. This place has been inhabited since prehistoric times. The island is famous for its Naxian dancers, prehistoric female sculpture, and its vast marble quarries.
Blue star.
These people take the ferry.
Our guide Maria gave us her morning briefing about Naxos. Then we walked to a small islet now connected to the town by a narrow causeway. Formerly there was an ancient temple of Apollo here. As the Mediterranean is now higher than in antiquity, it must have looked more like a hill than an island in ancient times. The temple was used as a quarry for the island in the Crusader era. The slabs of the doorway were too heavy to lift, so they remained on the hill, becoming a symbol of the island. It's known as a portera, meaning a big gate in modern Greek. The construction of the temple started sometime around 400 BCE. The position of the doorway faces Delos, birthplace of Apollo. Maria took the group to a shop selling a liqueur made from citron. We all got a taste. Now fortified, we climbed the steps to the citadel. It It was built after the Fourth Crusade in 1214 when the Venetians occupied Naxos. They became the Dukes of Naxia. 21 dukes ruled until 1566. Holding the high point on the island, it has a commanding view. The Turks then took possession of Naxos after the Venetians and held it until 1821. It became a member of the Greek state in 1832. The church at the top sits next to the remnants of the Sanudo Tower, built by the Crusader 1st Duke of Naxos in 1215. Back down on the waterfront, we passed shops selling meat and seafood. Sardines were being cleaned for the passing clientele. Walking on, we arrived at a marvelous kitchen shop. It was filled with every kind of colorful Greek basket, dish, condiment, and herb you might desire. Our stroll ended at a taverna on the waterfront. Maria had promised us another taste of Greece. This time, it was ouzo and octopus. We had to climb back to the top of Naxos. Just past the castle was the museum. Linda was excited about seeing the Archaeological Museum on Naxos, as it has an awesome collection of prehistoric cycladic sculptures from the islands around the area. Linda has been fascinated by these women and wanted to see authentic ones. They appear in this gallery, pure in their marble whiteness. All were found in cemeteries and created between 5000 and 2500 BCE. These Neolithic and Bronze Age figures have only a nose as a facial feature. There's something incredibly modern about these prehistoric female sculptures. They're elegant, simple, and yet full of life. The emotional pitch is achieved by the omission, and so the sculpture created a tension between the abstract and the real. These forms inspired the art of Modigliani and Brancusi. Naxos was the center of the creation of these marble women due to its huge quarries. That evening, our group drove out to the village of Melanes for a home-hosted dinner. Again, at the top of a hill, we met the couple hosting the meal. Agro-tourism at its best, they would be dancing for us that evening.
Maria has Maria has 8 grandchildren. And Evangelia is one of them. Γεια σου Ευαγγελίτσα. Γεια σου, γεια σου.
We were given dyed eggs for an appetizer. Some were more enthusiastic than others. We had wonderful Greek food and plenty of it. Of course, feta and moussaka were part of the meal. The next morning was overcast and chilly. We drove back to the village of Melanes, where we had dined the night before. We were taking our morning walk, this time to an orchard. There among the trees we would find a marble kouros.
you aren't. I think if I didn't have this jacket, I think I'd be a little on the cool side. Let me know, Linda, if you want me in or out of the picture. It's cold.
And the sun, oh my God,
Syros is a statue of a nude male youth of the Greek Archaic period. Syros means boy of noble rank. There is a very obvious influence of ancient Egyptian figures, as the stance is similar with arms by its side and one leg extended forward.
So he was digging over here, his land, and suddenly he found the statue. He buried it because of the time of the war, and he didn't want this statue to be seen. And then after the Second World War, the archaeologists came over here and they excavated the site and they revealed in full the statue of this man. So all of what you see up to the feet or on the right is marble. All of this is marble. Of course it's kind of gone grey because of the parasites growing on it, but it is marble. And it is one of the many quarries of ancient Naxos. So the statues like this were made in situ, they were made at the site. You can see how the mountain is being cut away as we're speaking. And over the years we've been coming here, we've been seeing this mountain, these two mountains are getting smaller and smaller, but very rich in marble. And one of the best marbles, well, the second best marble of the cycladic comes from Naxos. The best one comes from the island of Paros.
We took a tender from our ship to the sacred island of Delos. To the ancient Greeks, it was second in importance only to Delphi, and is one of the most important mythological, historical, and archaeological locations in Greece. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Ancient stone huts on the island show that Delos has been inhabited since about 3000 BCE. The huge number of ruined marble temples attests to the former religious importance of Delos. This must have been a busy harbor with the unloading of marble and supplies for its worshipping community and supporting organizations. As well as temples, there were villas decorated with columns and mosaics and agora or markets. By 100 BCE, it is estimated that there were 25,000 inhabitants. Delos had a theater that could hold 5,000 spectators. There was an annual festival in honor of Apollo. The most spectacular festival, the Delia, was held every 5 years. The accompanying athletic games, musical and dancing contests attracted visitors from across the Aegean. The island was an important meeting place, due partly to it being in the very center of the Cycladic islands. Delos had no ability to produce food, fiber, or timber. Everything had to be imported. The limited water was exploited with an extensive cistern and aqueduct system with wells and sanitary drains. It ultimately became a center of the slave trade. By the end of the 1st century, trade routes had changed. This meant that as time passed, Delos became uninhabited. The most recognizable area of Delos is the Terrace of the Lions. Originally, there were probably 12 lions. 5 remain today, with remnants of 3 others. The 4 seen outside here are copies. Their originals are in the Delos Museum. One original was long ago transported to Venice and can be seen at the main gate of the Venetian arsenal. The Terrace of Lions was dedicated to Apollo by the people of Naxos around 600 BCE. The terrace faced eastward along the sacred way to the temples. The lions, with their mouths open as if roaring or snarling, were meant to guard the sanctuaries and to inspire the feeling of divine fear among the worshippers. The way in which they were positioned is similar to the way sphinxes were arranged along the avenues in ancient Egypt. The Archaeological Museum of Delos is noted for its extensive collection unearthed at the site. The variety is considerable, but some items found in Delos are on display in the Athens Archaeological Museum. This museum contains several partial kouros, or boy of noble rank, from about 500 BCE, found in the sanctuary of Apollo. The 4 original, approximately 2,500-year-old lions sit safely inside a sunlit room. Once again, one is struck by the influence of ancient Egyptian sphinx sculpture apparent in the lions. Excavations began on Delos in 1872 and were performed on a massive scale, which is ongoing today. A statue of Artemis, also known as Diana, dates to 300 BCE. Beyond Artemis are marvelous mosaics removed to the staphe of the museum. The faces on its border are intriguing.
We had no trouble mooring on a beautiful day in Mykonos, which is just over a mile from Delos. This meant Mykonos became an important place for supplies and transit for the sacred land. The town is known as Chora, following the common practice in Greece when the name of the island itself is the same as the name of the principal town. The sun shines for up to 300 days a year, and it only rains between February and March. Although temperatures can rise as high as 104 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer months, the strong winds mean the average temperature are usually around 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Winters are mild with the average temperature of 59 degrees Fahrenheit.
At least 100 times, but nowadays those drift nets that, fish, octopi and squids and things like that, they put them where? In the washing machines. Yes, in big washing machines, and they become less chewy. But this is the traditional way. Yes. The crab, So,
Αυτό θέλει κάνα 2 μέρες στο ψυγείο, αλλά εμείς θα το φάμε φρέσκο. Θα τον ολομπράσω.
Is it dead?
yes.
Oh, sure. Oh my God. Oh, yeah.
Very good.
That would be cool.
Φέα, το κάνω λίγο εγώ, να σου δείξω να μάθεις. Κάνεις έτσι που να βλέπεις, θα το φανάς μόνο έτσι. Αλλά πρόσεχε τα ρούχα.
Tenderizing.
Θα σου πω εγώ, θα είναι πολύ ώρα για να μαλακώσεις. Εντάξει.
We made our way into one of the small Greek chapels on the waterfront. It's a miniature version of a Greek church with its dome ceiling. This chapel was dedicated to Nicholas, who was a Greek bishop and lived from 270 to 343. Nicholas was one of the bishops who decided the Christian Nicene Creed, still recited today. And yes, Virginia, he's sometimes known as Santa Claus. We wandered through the tiny lanes of an area called Little Venice. The area is filled with small shops and cafes. It's the focus of daytime shopping and nighttime partying. Mykonos windmills are a defining feature of the waterfront. There are many dotted around the island, but most are concentrated in the main town of Chora. The famous lower mills stand in a row on a hill overlooking the sea to harness the strong northern winds. Capped with wood and straw, the windmills were built by the Venetians in the 1500s to mill flour and remained in use until the early 20th century. Many have been refurbished and serve as homes today. Little Venice lines the waterfront with its balconies hanging over the water. It was constructed in the 1700s. The buildings originally belonged to the rich merchants or sea captains. Small doors provide direct access to the sea from storage areas and led people to believe that the owners were actually secretly pirates. Many of the houses have been converted into cafes and shops, which we passed earlier on the street side. We moored in Hermopolis, the largest city on the island. We set off from Artemis to walk the marble streets of the town, with bougainvillea cascading from the neoclassical buildings. We went out to tour the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church. Orthodox services are held in Koine, or Common Greek, the original language of the New Testament of the Christian Bible. The striking interior reveals a prosperous community. Next, we walked to the main square of Hermopolis. The Greek War of Independence against Turkish rule ended in 1832, and this city prospered with new freedoms. Who doesn't love an open-air market? The colors are a visual feast. It made us want to stay all day and take photos of these succulent specimens. The Greek Orthodox Church of the Assumption is another kind of opulent feast. The classic Greek icons were everywhere in the stunningly beautiful church. In a side corridor is the radiant painting from 1567, Dormition of the Virgin by El Greco. It combines traditional and Renaissance techniques. Born in Greece, Dominikos Theotokopoulos became known as El Greco when he moved to Spain. Back down on the waterfront, there are many monuments to the armed forces of Greece. The artist took inspiration from the iconic Greek symbols. We continued along the wharf with its charming skyline and some quaint vehicles. Suddenly, we heard a ferry come barreling into the harbor. Wow, can those big ships really maneuver?
We went out on deck to watch our sail-in to Santorini. Its breathtaking beauty is due to a catastrophic volcanic eruption resulting in an almost round shape of an enormous collapsed caldera. We passed the picturesque town of Aegean, which we would visit later in the day. First, we sailed into the port below the capital of Santorini, Fyra. we could see the zigzag path that led up to Fira. You have 3 choices for the ascent: by cable car, walking the path, or riding a mule. Van, with some others, chose the cable car. Another group of us chose the mules. I was happy that our mule driver attached my mule to his. That made my method of one hand on the saddle and one on my camera a bit less scary. We took off up the hill, winding back and forth, past walkers and other mules. As we looked down, we could see the stables and our ship Artemis growing smaller below us. Cable cars passed us going down the hillside. Fira came closer as Artemis grew smaller. Then, as we approached the top, a photographer snapped our pictures. Of course, I bought this one.
Linda, have you arranged for massages for us?
Kathy, Jim, Mary Lou, Bernice, and I successfully stayed on our mules. While we hung on to our mules, Van and his group watched our ascent from the cable cars.
It didn't look too close. There's Linda right there.
I saw Linda. I saw Linda in her green jacket.
Good.
Santorini is essentially what remains after an enormous volcanic eruption 3,600 years ago. You can see the layers of sediment that formed the volcano as you rise up its side.
So there's one at the bottom and then one at the top.
She doesn't trust us.
They actually are steps that the donkeys go up.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that they're in a hurry to get down to get fed.
So you got donkey in front of you. You have to trade with people. How was your experience?
giant central lagoon, surrounded by 980-foot-high cliffs on three sides, slopes down to the Aegean. The 4,000-foot depth of the caldera makes it possible for all but the largest ships to anchor in the protected bay. The volcanic eruption on Santorini was a major catastrophe, which is estimated to have occurred in 1629 BCE. The eruption and resulting tsunami was one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history. Bristlecone pine rings in America, as well as oaks in Ireland, show evidence of a volcanic eruption at that time. Chinese records of the period tell of a yellow fog, a weak sun, frost in July, and the withering of all 5 cereal crops. The eruption devastated the island of Santorini, including its Minoan settlement and those on nearby Crete. It has been speculated that the destruction provided the basis for Plato's story of Atlantis. Murals of boxing boys and a fisherman, among many others, were found in the destroyed village. A thorough evacuation in advance of the catastrophe must have occurred, since few artifacts and no corpses were found buried in the ash at the destroyed Santorini settlement. We drove over to the charming village of Aegean. It's world famous for its quintessentially Greek views. Two views in particular are memorable. The first is the hillside with the windmill that we had seen on our cruise into the caldera. We walked out onto an overlook and found it basking in the afternoon sunlight. We walked along the rim to the other end of Aegean, headed for the blue dome skyline, which is in a million vacation brochures of Greece. We approached the other stunning view, tantalizingly close. We looked down pathways to the sea for a glimpse of the iconic view. And then, there it was. As we gazed at the blue Aegean, Van saw through his telephoto lens Artemis sitting across the lagoon at the waterfront of Phyra. We needed to return by bus and get down to the ship for our dinner time sail away. This descent has been speeded up to shorten the time to return to Artemis.
This cruise, we did many things different than the original one. Let's say, just to describe what we did, normally you hold your right ear with your left hand, normally like this. It's very easy. But what we did this. But anyway, we touched our ear, so it's okay. But we touched all the islands, we made it, and at the end we were all safe and sound and happy. So it was our goal. Thank you. I always say that I'm a lucky captain. You know.
You are.
Whatever we do, it requires a huge teamwork. So I was not alone.
I'm